So before I get too far with pinning the pleats and spaces on this shear where we did the math and had 19 pleats at 6 3/4 and 18 spaces at 3 inches, I want to see what this pleat at 6 3/4 is going to look like, just in case it's too much fabric. So I'm going to pin it kind of like how it might be stitched at the sewing machine, and then mock up a pleat. And then if I like it, then I'll stick with it, and if I don't, I'll change it. So if I were to sew it, it would get stitched right there, and then I would be able to make that 3-finger pinch like this. And these are going to be Euro pleats, so they'll be tacked at the top. Actually, I think I really like it. I just want to even this out to really get a good glimpse of how this will look. Oh yeah, something like that. That's not too big at all. It's beautiful. And then that's the space. And I'll have another one, and so on. Let me see what this would look like as a 2-finger Euro pleat. That actually might be even prettier. I might want them a little bit smaller if I go with a 2-finger, but I do like that. What to do? So I have done the math a little bit different so that my pleats are a little bit smaller and my spaces are a little bit bigger. And then I mocked up a new pleat to see what that looks like. And here I'm very happy with this 2-finger Euro pleat with 6 1/4 inches in the pleat instead of 6 3/4, and then my space will be 3 1/2 instead of 3. So that's my final answer, and now I can continue to mark these pleats and spaces all along the header. And I'll just press this out real quick. There we go. And so now I'm back to pinning. So 6 1/4 is actually perfect at the end of this little ruler, so it's easy to mark the pleats. And then the spaces are 3 1/2, 6 1/4, 3 1/2, 6 1/4, 3 1/2. And then this will hold my header in place as I work on the fabric and table it to length and everything. And then my pleats and spaces are already marked. Once I get to tabling, then I can hem it and fan fold and then sew the pleats, and then I don't even have to think about this math after that because it's already done. The fabric is already, stretched out and laying nice and flat and laying on a straight line. It doesn't take much effort to do the math and then mark the pleats and spaces. You'd want to pin this anyway while you're working on it, so might as well pin it with all the pleats and spaces figured out and marked where they're going to be stitched instead of doing extra work. And then I'm gonna also put a pin at each space before I take it off the table. I'm going to turn all these pins and then hide the tip of the pin in the fabric. So as I'm turning them, I'm going to bury that pointy part so that I can protect my skin from cutting and bleeding, and then also I can protect the fabric from getting snagged, because sheer fabric is very susceptible to snagging on pins. If I were to leave that tip of the pin hanging out, you know, imagine maneuvering all of this fabric as you're working on it, and we definitely don't want to damage the fabric or snag it or put any runs into it. And we don't want to cut our fingers or legs as we're at the sewing machine. Your legs are going to be right there underneath the fabric as you're working on it. So besides your hands and fingers and arms, you can protect your legs. And so I'm pinning the part of the fabric that was already on the table, and then I can pull up that little bit that was hanging off and finish pinning it. Almost done over here. And so at the end where the fabric is still raw, so this is the raw edge, this is where we're going to turn the side hem. And there's some extra here I'll be cutting off, but that'll be our side hem right there. And then this is, there we go. That's the side hem, and then this is going to be our overlap. So we have a 4-inch overlap right there, and then the first pleat is right after that. So then the rest of it is marked, pleats and spaces, and then the very opposite end is marked the same way as this one, where the raw edge has 3 inches marked off for a side hem and then a 4-inch section for the return. So I'm not gonna do anything with this until I get the drapery turned and pinned on the table to table it for the length. And then this is gonna be the bottom hem. And so when we get the length of the drapery pressed into place, then we'll cut off this selvage and then turn it under, and it will be a double hem like that. So that happens after we table to length, and then the side hem goes in on top of that, and then we take it to the hemmer and blind stitch all the 3 hems, the 2 side hems and the bottom hem. And then after that we can fan fold, and that's where having the pleats and spaces marked comes in handy. That part is already done. So now over here I just have to pick up this little bit right here and mark it. Then I'm going to hang it up and actually go back to the serger and get the other half of this pair to the same place as this one with the buckram serged in, and then bring it over here to turn it and mark it. So I left off on a pleat, 6 1/4. That means the next pin is a space at 3 1/2. And again, 6 1/4, 3 1/2, 3 1/2. Let's see if I end up at this pin over here. So here's my side hem, and the return, and I should end up with a pleat right there. So see if the math works out. So I have a little bit extra. So what I could do is just move this over and then have some to cut off, or what I like to do is work in a little bit more into the pleats. So I'm gonna leave the spaces at 3.5 and then just put your pin a little bit past that 6 1/4 mark, and then eventually you'll get even with your pins. And that does mean I have to repin some of them, which is no big deal. I'd rather do this and use all the fabric and have as much fullness as possible than cut off fabric. So I'll just keep doing this until I end up even with a pin. I'm almost there. And so if I had seams in this fabric, I would be making sure that all the seams are landing in spaces. And that's another reason why sometimes I have to backtrack. There we go. So I'm even right here. Even enough to where this is, you know, about 6 3/8, which is about what all of those are over there. And then the rest over here will be 6 1/4, which is gonna be beautiful. That extra 1/8 of an inch in the pleats on this side won't be visible once everything is pleated and tacked and hanging up. So that way I worked in all of the extra fabric into the pleats, not the spaces. If you ever have to make adjustments, you want to do that in your pleats. And now I'm turning the pins and hiding that pointy end. And then I can hang this one up. There we go. Now it's time to table the sheer to length. Hi, at the finished length, which is 106. So I have a ruler laying at the exact spot of 106, just to be sure that we have a straight line in case my grid is a little bit off, which it kind of is in some spots. So we like to just lay a ruler down, then we know exactly where we're going to pin the fabric. So on the left of the screen is where the 60-inch ruler is pinned to the table at the finished length. And now I'm getting all the fabric unfolded, and we're going to start with the header at that finished length. So this is a little bit backwards from how we table drapery that has a lining. Normally we would put the hem at the ruler edge. And so here we have the hem at the 0 line. And so I decided to cut off that selvage instead of leaving it on as I'm tabling. So that's what we're doing right here. I'm cutting off that selvage, and that means that we railroaded this fabric because the selvage is running parallel to the hem. This is a wide fabric, a 1/18-inch fabric. So we were able to railroad it, which means there's no seams in the fabric, and the selvage is running parallel to the ground. And that selvage kind of was tight along the that edge, which is going to be the hem. So I decided to cut it off. That way we don't have any tight hems at the bottom. So now that that's all gone, I can continue pinning the header at the finished length line right next to the ruler. And the pins are going right through the buckram. And you want to be careful because we do have all the pins marked for the pleats and spaces. So just be aware that your pins that are marking the pleats and spaces, that you don't take any of those out as you move the fabric as you're tabling. If you want to use different colored pins, that might be a good idea. But I have all the same color yellow pins here. So here's a little bit of a close-up. You can see that the header is butted up right next to that 60-inch ruler, which is pinned to the table at the finished length line. And now I'm just going to get all of the excess off the table and smooth out all of the bubbles and wrinkles and air pockets. And I'm starting on the leading edge. You always want to start on your leading edge. So the fabric is face down. So with my leading edge on the bottom of the screen, that means that this is a left panel because the return is on the floor and you're looking at the back of the fabric. So that means this is a left panel. And the leading edge fabric is raw and it's lined up with the dark black line on the edge of the table. And now I'm getting out all the excess fabric, all the little bubbles and stretch of the fabric. So you want to, with a very, very smooth ruler, smooth out the fabric and then pull out any tension that's left, and then fold up the bottom fabric at the 0 line, which is going to be your hem, your bottom hem. And I'm doing that part before the side hem because your side hem is you want to fold that over on top of your bottom hem. So I'm just pinning it down at the 0 line, the bottom hem, and then I'm going to press it and lock it into place. And I'm just being extra careful. Use as many pins as you need to get the fabric to cooperate, because it's a little bit challenging with some shears. Some move more than others. And so I just want to make sure everything stays right where I want it on that line. And then I'm using my gravity feed iron to press and steam and lock that bottom hem line into place. And then I can double turn it. The difference between the length of this wide fabric and the finished length after I put in the header left me with just the right amount at the bottom to turn my double hem, which normally I would have extra or not enough maybe. But in this case, it was the perfect amount, so I didn't have to draw a line and cut any excess off. It was really convenient to just double fold what was left, and it was nice and even. So it kind of saved me a couple of steps there. And now I'm just going to press that top fold of the bottom hem. That's where the stitch will go. Press that into place. And then I can start on the side hem. So I'm going to turn over 3 inches of that fabric, and it's really nice and straight because I pulled a thread when I cut the fabric. So I know I have a true edge that's nice and straight, and I can trust it, and the drapery will hang nice and straight right there. I do have a little bit extra at the header from serging on the buckram, so I'll cut that little bit off, but the rest of it is nice and straight. So I'm just getting the leading edge folded over at 3 inches and making sure that it's really perfectly straight on that line on the gridded tabletop. And then I'll press that into place, just like with the bottom hem, lock that into place, and then I can double turn it. So it'll have a double 1.5 inch side hem. So you can already see that this drapery is coming together. We already have the header in place with the buckram double turned, and all the pleats and spaces are marked. The bottom hem is double turned and pinned, and now I'm double turning the leading edge side hem, and after the whole panel is tabled, we can take it over to the hemmer and blind stitch the 3 hems, the 2 side hems and the bottom hem, and then it's ready to fan fold. So the process for me of making and tabling a sheer drapery really goes faster by starting at the header with the buckram in place rather than starting on the bottom hem like we would do with a normal drapery. Once I started doing this, it became my favorite way to make sheer drapery. Used to be where we didn't make as many sheer drapery, so when I would get one, I would put the hem in it just because that was my habit, and then I would go to table it and think, well, shoot, I should have put the header in first. I just didn't think it through, and then I was fighting with the buckram trying to get it in there nice and straight. So it's just been kind of an evolution for me to remember that it's easier to make a sheer drapery by putting the buckram in first and tabling backwards, which means from the top down rather than from the bottom up. So now this is just my favorite way, and I don't ever forget to do it this way because it's a habit for me now. So now that the bottom hem and the side hem of this first section are pressed into place, I'm just pinning them. And then before I move the sheer fabric to the next section, I'm going to pin a straight line because I can see through the sheer to the gridded tabletop underneath. I'm putting pins along one of the lines to give me a straight edge to make sure that when I move all that fabric over, I can line those pins up on a new line on the other side of the table to ensure that I'm still square, because that fabric is, so squirrely and shifty that I wouldn't really know if I have all the fabric laying nice and straight. So this is just a little bit of a helping line that once I move it over, I'll get those pins on the line and then I'll take those pins out. I don't want to leave them in there any longer than necessary because of course, we don't want to damage the fabric. So right now I'm removing the pins that are holding the header in place, and then I can move it over. So this will basically be width number 2, even though there's no seams. It's an imaginary line. And I'm going to get over enough fabric to table the next section. And those pins are going to help me determine where I'm going to start. And I'm just carefully getting all of the fabric up onto the table that I need to work with next. And I'm going to start again at the top where the ruler is and start pinning the header through the buckram, lining it up with the ruler at the finished length line. And once I get the header in place, then I'm going to make sure that those pins running parallel to the side of the table are on a line. And then I can just kind of repeat what I did in width number 1, where I'm getting the bottom hem tabled to length. And so this section, this width number 2, I'll call it, will go faster than the previous one because there's no side hem to worry about. And you can see all of the wrinkles and bubbles that need to get worked out. And you want to just take your time and make sure that you have all of those out, because that's going to affect your hemline. And so here I'm adjusting that pin line. Just getting each pin on a line. Slight adjustments back and forth. And there, now it's in place. And so now I have a new bit of bubbles to work with. So I'm going to smooth those out. It's really interesting to watch this from the bird's eye view where the camera is clamped at the ceiling and you can see what's happening on the table. I can still see one big bubble. And I'm waiting for it to go away. There it is. Okay, now we're working out that big bubble. And then any extra little bubbles that I still see at the bottom. There we go. If you give that a whole section at the bottom several tugs, then you'll kind of act like gravity, where when the drapery is hanging, of course, gravity is going to pull on any excess fabric. So you want to give a little tug all the way along, back and forth like a typewriter. Pull out the excess stretch of the fabric is basically what you're doing. And then even smoothing it out with your hands. Of course, it might bounce back, which is fine, but as long as you smooth out as much as you can, then you're going to have a better hemline at the bottom when it's hanging. And so now I'm taking out those pins. I don't want to leave them in there. Now that they've done their job, now they're not necessary anymore. And I'm going to bring them down and use them at that bottom hem and get that folded over at the 0 line. And then I can just press it, double turn the bottom, the rest of the bottom. It's already kind of folded into place just because the previous section was double turned. So it's almost harder to leave it completely unfolded now that the first width has the hem in place. So it's just folded under a little bit so I can get the bottom 0 line turned and pressed into place. And then I can fold the double turn all the way down to the bottom. I like to get that raw edge all the way down to the 0 line right here. Spend some time to make sure that that raw edge gets all the way down to the bottom. That way you'll have a nice straight double turned bottom hem. You don't want to have that line being uneven. It's really kind of a pet peeve of mine, so I do spend some time to make sure that that's nice and straight. And then I'll press that into place, pin it, and then before I move the fabric to width number 3, of course I have to pin a new line along the edge of the table at the top of the screen so that I can have the next section ready to move over. And I'm pinning my pins parallel to the bottom hem. That way when I'm at the blind hemmer, I can leave them in as I'm sewing and just go right past them. So they're pinned about an inch or an inch and a half below where I'm actually going to be running that hem through where the needle is. Okay, so now I'm pinning that line that I can see through the table. Which is a temporary reference line. And then I can take out the pins at the header carefully so that I don't remove any of the pins that are marking the pleats and spaces. And then I can carefully pick up what I need to table next. So you want to pick up the fabric and put it on the table rather than go to the other side and pull it over. If you leave the extra off the table and pull from the other side, you are going to risk damaging the fabric, stretching it or snagging it or putting a hole in it. So you want to pick up a whole bunch, put it on the table, then go to the other side and then maneuver it into position. These are all lessons learned the hard way. There's things on your table that, or under your table, that might trap the fabric, and if you pull too hard from the other side, something bad might happen. So pick it up, put it on top, and then go to the other side, smooth it out, and then start pinning the header again at the finished length line. And I'm always starting from the same side because I want to make sure that I'm starting where those pins are, the reference line pins, where they're on a line. So if you start on the other side, you might not be able to see if that reference line is on a line. And my table has a layer of carpet padding underneath, so that's why I'm able to pin through the canvas, through the padding, and it holds the fabric into place as I'm smoothing it out and getting the wrinkles out. That padding is a really great tool to use when tabling fabric. So again, this is just a repeat of the previous width. This is width number 3. And you're going to get out all of the bubbles. This is really satisfying to rewatch as I'm explaining it. And I'm just getting that reference line, the pins on a line, a couple more bubbles, smoothing out any extra. And if you're having someone help you, you want to be really careful that they're smoothing out the same amount of fabric as you. Everybody has a little bit different touch, and I really highly recommend that the same person that starts tabling a panel finishes that panel and does the other one too, if it's a pair, because 2 different people are going to table to length a little bit differently, and you don't want to have a section of your panel or the other panel shorter or longer than the rest of it. And again, this is just a repeat of what we've been doing. Now that we have everything laying nice and straight, all the pins are on the line, the header is pinned at the finished length line. Get your bottom hem folded over at the 0 line, press it, double fold the rest of it, press that, pin it, mark a new reference line, and then move over the extra. I've had a few questions recently about what kind of iron I use, and this is basically a gravity feed iron. So you can see the tank that's hanging on the left of the screen holds a good amount of water, at least a gallon, and it filters the water, and the water is cold up in that tank, and it goes through the tube that feeds to the iron, and the hot iron turns that water into steam. So it's a little bit different than a boiler iron, which would run boiling hot water through an iron. So this is cold water or room temperature water that gets fed through the tube by gravity, which is why it has to hang from the ceiling so that gravity has room to do its job. If you have your tank hanging too low, then it's not going to work really well. So you have to make sure you have the right amount of space above the iron to the tank of water. And you also need to have, enough room for your iron to reach each end of your table. So it's kind of a balancing act. And I'm pretty much stretched to my limit where that iron, it does reach my end, but you can see every time I go over there that the tank is kind of moving around. So it works, but if my table was any longer, I would probably have to have another iron over there or move this tank over, but then I wouldn't reach the other end. And of course, sometimes we need to reach both ends of the table. So a little bit of information on how that works. And these are not expensive and they work really well. And I like the weight of the iron. It's kind of heavy, but it helps me get a nice hem or crease or whatever I'm pressing. The weight of it helps me get a nice crisp press on it, whatever fabric I'm working on. And so now I am just moving over the last bit of this panel. This is not even a whole width that I have left here. It's kind of like a half of a width. And so now that I'm at the other end of the panel, this would be the return, the left return. And I'm going to make sure that the raw edge lines up with the last line on the table, or at least a line. It doesn't have to be the last line. And just like when I started, I had a nice straight raw edge. That's because I pulled a thread when I cut the fabric. So same thing over here. I know that that line is nice and straight, so I'm going to make sure I line that up with the table. And then my reference line of pins that I had pinned previous is not as important on this last section. I'm going to look at them to see if they're straight, but if they're not perfectly straight, I'm going to refer to my raw edge rather than my pin line. I hope that makes sense because it's hard to see those pins right now. And again, you want to pull out your bubbles and get your bottom hem situated first before you do the side hem. And you can see half of this bottom hem is already turned and pinned, so it's just that last bit that has to be addressed. But even though I'm only working on the last half width, I still pinned the whole header at the finished length line, just so I can recheck what I have already tabled. And this part's a little wrinkly, so I'm pressing it before I get to the bottom hem. Just making some more adjustments along the side hem raw edge right there. Again, with the sheer fabric, it moves a lot. So it's a lot of little adjustments. I just took out all the pins. Work out the extra bubbles. Get the bottom hem situated. And then you're almost finished because you just have to turn over that last side hem, pin it, and then you can take the whole panel to the blind hemmer, blind stitch to the two side hems and the bottom hem, hand stitch the corners, and then it's ready to fan fold. It's nice to have the header ready to go. I don't have to rework that fabric and move it any more than necessary, because I already did the math and the pinning of the pleats and spaces when I was turning the buckram and pressing the header into place. Get it all done while you're working on it. I will make another video showing the fan folding step of this panel, which is another kind of lengthy process, so I'll save that for another video. And if you have any questions about what you've seen so far in this tabling video, let me know. And also, if you have any questions on how I came up with the math, the sizes of the pleats and spaces, let me know. And we'll have a extra extended version of this video on Patreon if anybody wants to see more steps. That'll be over there. And I'm really excited. If anybody is still watching after all of these minutes, you've stuck with me and you're at the end, the other end of this pretty wide panel. And the only thing left to do after I press this side hem in is to get all the fabric up off the floor onto the table. That way it's ready to scoop up and bring to the hemmer. And again, you don't want to pull it off the table with any extra fabric on the floor, because you could damage it. So you're going to go to the other side and pick it up gently and put it onto the table and get it into a nice pile that you can grab and cradle like a baby. That's how special our fabric is. We want to carry it like a baby when we go from one place to another in the workroom. And here, just making sure all the pins are in place, and I'm burying the points of the pins also. All along the hems, all the points are buried inside the fabric, just like in the header, so that they're not going to damage anything. Taking off all the pins at the header, and then I can pick it up off the floor and put it on the table. There we go. Ready to go to the hemmer. And then I'll turn off the camera, and then here it is installed and finished. Thank you again for watching.